Hey guys, I am Nishant and welcome to WebSockets 101. In this series, we are going to learn all about WebSockets, how to implement WebSockets in your applications, and at the end of the video, we will build an online multiplayer dashboard to solidify the concepts that we have learned. If you want something brief, check out my video on WebSockets in 150 seconds. So let's get started. But first of all, let's understand the basics. What is a WebSocket and why do we need to use it? So let's understand this in simpler terms. If you are a developer, and I know you are, you must have heard of HTTP, which is the communication protocol widely used in web development. So let me write this here. HTTP. It is the communication protocol. Okay, fine. It is the communication protocol widely used in web development. For example, when we want to communicate with the backend from the front end to get some data or to post some data or to update some data or even delete it, we make a request to the backend server. This request is done through REST API or representational state transfer, which basically connects the backend and the front end through a temporary link. When we make requests to the backend to get some data, we use this HTTP protocol. So let me write it here. Where is the arrow mark? I guess this one. So when we make a request to the backend, we use this. So 1 minute. We use something called REST API, which is basically getting the data from the backend using GET request or sending data to the backend using POST request. So it has multiple types. Let me write them. We have GET, we have POST, and so on, like put, delete, patch, all of them. So these are done through something called REST APIs. So when we use HTTP, what happens is one-way connection is built from client to server. So let's say that we need some data from the backend. Let me write it here. Let me make two squares. This is the front end or the client side. Let's say this is the client. Similarly, we have a server, which is the backend. So let's say we want some data when we submit a form, or I can say when we submit a form, we want to send some data to the server. Okay, this 1 second. Form. Let's say we submit a form. We will make a POST request when we submit a form. So the data will be sent through the payload to the server, where it will be stored in the database from the backend. So if I write to the DB. So this is what we do when we call a REST API. We make a HTTP connection from client to server or from server to client. So when we make a request, like a POST request using REST API, this will send us some data back also, like a success or error message and code. And we then see this data here, true or anything, or let's say 201 or 200 also, anything. So in this case, when we make a HTTP connection, what is happening is we are making a request to the backend to store some data in the database, and once it does, it is sending us back a request code of 201. It means success. Like this. It means success. This is known as a REST API call, which is done through HTTP connection, which is the communication protocol, as I said before. So this whole thing makes one connection, and once the success message we have seen on the front end, this connection is closed. So I can say this connection is temporary. It is a temporary connection because once our data is back in our hands, or let's say we get some response code of 201 or 200, or in some cases error codes, the connection is closed. And this means we are having, or we finished one connection and it is closed. Correct. It is closed. This is known as a HTTP connection, if you see on the screen. Now, this is called HTTP connection, and this is a response and request based type. And one thing to notice is this is a one-way communication, because either the client will send to server and the server will respond back, or server will send to the client and the client will respond back. This means it is a one-way communication. And the thing is, this connection called HTTP, this protocol, it is stateless. What I mean is, each and every time we make a connection, we have to specify some headers like tokens, origin, cookies, and much more. Every time we make a request, we need to repeat all those things: tokens, headers, cookies, origins, all of them. It means it does not have any data where your header can be stored, and the channel is closed when the communication happens or destroyed. It is like sending someone a letter and expecting the reply back, which could take days, even months, or even years in some cases. This is called a HTTP connection. Now let's jump onto the WebSockets. What is a WebSocket? So when we use a WebSocket, we make a connection between server and the client. That is similar to HTTP. Okay, let me just clear all this, or just make it here. Let me write this as HTTP. HTTP, correct? Now let's talk about WebSockets that I have started. WebSockets. So similar to HTTP, it is also a communication protocol. But the thing is, it is not so similar. It has a major difference. So when we use a WebSocket, we make a connection request between the server and the client, or the client and the server. So initially, what we do is we make a request just like this. So let me just repeat these things here. We have a, let me just copy this. So we are having a client and a server like this. So initially in WebSockets, what we will do is we will make a request connection from our client to server like this. Correct? This is known as a handshake, the initial connection. If I write this as handshake, this is the initial connection request from client to server initially. So when this happens, when the client will send a request of handshake to server, the server will check all the things like headers, origins, cookies, and all, like we do in HTTP request, like in REST APIs. But the thing is, this will happen only once at the beginning. So basically what I want to say is, with WebSockets, we don't need to keep making connections each time the client needs something from server, or the server needs something from the client. The connection is like a permanent connection between the server and the client, or the client and the server, until we close the connection. So what will happen here is, when we make a request, which is called a handshake, if it is successful, let me revert this to a back arrow here. So when this is successful, we will get something called a success message here. One sec. Which means connection established. So now the connection between the server and the client is done. It means our data can flow from server to client anytime or at any time, or from server to or from client to server as well. What I mean is this is a permanent connection, which means it is not it does not close. So when a WebSocket is done, when we make a WebSocket connection, the connection is long-lived connection until we close the connection. So first of all, we make a request from client to server, and that's all. Any data from client to server will flow without any hassle, or data from server to client will flow without any hassle. It's like WebSocket is a two-way street, allowing the interchange of data between server and the client simultaneously. In other words, the client and server can send data to each other independently at any time. This is called a WebSocket, which is like a phone call. Initially, when we call a person, the connection is made and you can say pretty much anything, which is received on the other end without any latency or delay. But why do we need to use WebSockets and when? Let's say that there are scenarios in real life where you want to have real time data. Which type of data? Real time. So there is a tool called Google Docs, which is basically a document editor from Google, which uses data in real time. What I mean is, if you open one tab and use Google Docs and open another tab and use Google Docs, both on the same user, then what happens is when you edit it on one end, it will be on the other end. So what I mean is, when you edit on one end, it will reflect on the other end without any latency. Imagine if Google Docs used HTTP, we have to refresh our page every time we make a change on a document, or if we want to receive some data on the document. Let's take some more examples where we prefer WebSockets over HTTP connection. And they are, if you are building a chat application or a trading app or a multiplayer dashboard. Because if you use HTTP, we have to keep calling the APIs to refresh the data, which does not seem a good option. The increased latency would have us want to throw our app in the dustbin. And this is why we use WebSockets.